We're talking with clients about, how much will they need for retirement?
Sure. So this is, something that always comes about of, hey, what's the ultimate number? How much do I need?
Welcome to the Live Greater View, a financial planning podcast produced by VLP Financial Advisors that discusses life, money, and perspective. We help clients live their best life at every stage through our VLP Live Greater partnership process. Thank you for tuning in. All right, welcome back. I'm Rose Price, a certified financial planner and one of the partners here at VLP Financial Advisors.
I'm Chris Mullen, partner and financial planner.
So today's topic is a great one, Chris. We get this one all the time. How long will my money last in retirement? So a lot to unpack here because everyone thinks there's a simple answer. And as we know, there's not.
Right. This is a title that will grab a lot of clicks. Hey, is $5 million enough to retire? Is $1 million enough? All these sort of headlines. And of course, everybody's thinking, well, how do I benchmark relative to that number? And then your wheels start spinning. So glad we're going to add some context to this today.
Yeah. And this is, again, if you ever have a question that you'd like us or topic to cover, please email us at info@vlpfa.com and we'll be happy to add it to our list and our context. All right. So, Chris, why don't we start with some of the key things that come into play when you're thinking about, and we're talking with clients about, how much will they need for retirement?
Sure. So this is, something that always comes about of, hey, what's the ultimate number? How much do I need, to retire?
They're walking around with an actual number.
Right. Yeah. That's what they have in their head. And then they're really extrapolating that. Well, how long is this money going to actually last me during retirement? And truly, as just you would think, it is different for every single client on a case-by-case basis. And the way that I go about explaining it is, hey, it's all modeled on your lifestyle.
Yep.
And what we do is essentially plan to make sure that you can continue the lifestyle that you have today well into the future.
Yeah, one of the things we always hear from clients is, my cousin or my sister said they have $2 million. That's all they need for retirement. And I go, that's great, but what are your expenses compared? So There's a lot to unpack in that scenario. So the other thing I think that comes about is what type of accounts you actually have, right? This comes into play constantly, where if you say, oh, I just have my retirement account, typically your 401k, your IRA, or something of that nature, that's very different than having a Roth IRA or having an individual account or a trust, because the taxation is completely different while you have it and when you take that money out. As most people think about it, they think retirement is their 401k at work, right? And that traditional 401k they've been socking money into, they get that tax deduction. It grows tax-free, but the when we talk to them is, you realize that gets taxed as ordinary income. So that has other implications for Medicare and those types of things down the road, where a Roth IRA, different, right? You put money in after tax, or a Roth 401k, grows tax-free, and that money comes out tax-free. So very different, right? Everybody likes free, like tax-free, even better, right? Yeah. We have this conversation all the time. If you have $1 million IRA and $1 million Roth, they're not the same, because the $1 million IRA,
20 to 30% of that belongs to the government.
Right. And the Roth, all yours.
Yep.
Right. So, and then you think about even the individual account, or if you had a trust or a joint account, now you have capital gains. So again, there's a range on capital gains depending on your income. So all these factors come into play, but typically capital gains will be less than your ordinary income tax.
Definitely. And that weaves into our conversations with legacy planning of, hey, how should I approach all of these assets, and how should I think about what I'm going to use for my retirement versus what I'm going to leave for kids? How should I model that? So all different sorts of conversations come out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's talk about some of the key factors that will determine how long your money will last. So we kind of touched on it, which is tax bracket. So again, if you did all this great saving and you were putting money away for years in your 401k, and this is really the last couple of years is the first generation where people have their entire working career has been in a 401k.
Yep.
And they're retiring. Some people are retiring with $3 to $4 million in their 401k.
Yep. And then you get these massive, tax burdens of required minimum distributions. At a certain point, you obviously don't have a choice. You have to start taking money out. You layer on Social Security income, all these different things. And like you said, there's all the trickle down effects with that. When we get together with clients and we have a clean slate of, hey, you're approaching retirement and obviously enter into retirement, we make sure that we model essentially all different tax rates, not only where they are at that moment, but oftentimes into the future.
Yeah. And then, average living expenses. This is a huge one. And we're going to touch a little bit on some examples we've had and seen with clients is, everybody's at a different range. If you live in my hometown of Altoona, PA versus Northern Virginia, your living expenses Your mortgage is just a little different. Everything's just, it's all very relative. So we'll talk about, how much does it cost to keep the lights on, when you're entertainment, those types of things, and travel usually being a big one.
Yeah, and your living expenses, that directly obviously ties back to lifestyle. And it's not realistic to think that somebody's going to have a drastically different lifestyle in retirement than what they've had all of the years that they've been working. So if you're somebody that spends a lot of money and all of a sudden you're modeling, hey, I'm going to, drop my spending.
I'm going to ratchet it down.
Right. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
Same thing where we have these, clients that are really type A people. They just, spend, they live within their means. And all of a sudden, if they're modeling, hey, I'm going to spend a ton more money during retirement, probably not likely to happen either. So it works both ways.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with a client and I said, you think your expenses are going to be here, but you're going to see they're going to be different 6 months. And they're like, you were right. I said, I've done this a little bit longer, but that's okay. And then debt. I mean, that's a big one. We really try to get clients to go into retirement with little to no debt. And, if they're carrying a mortgage, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But typically, we want to make sure we're not carrying credit card debt and those types of things where the rates are going to be absorbent and higher. And you can be in a scenario where this could have a bigger impact on your lifestyle.
Of course. You work with a client that, is carrying some of those different, liabilities, and you can tell, hey, they're carrying that mental, baggage when they're retired. And then you work with somebody who has very little debt. When they wake up, their feet hit the ground. It's just like, hey, it's a different feeling. I have my assets and, I'm able to enjoy, what I've worked so hard for.
Yeah. And retirement age is a big one. So let's unpack that one. I mean, we have clients, clients who retire at 60, swear they're only going to live to 80. We're still working that one out. But, and typically when you retire that young, I always say this is the youngest and the healthiest you're going to be, right? Typically, unless there's some scenario, but typically that's your scenario. And they're likely to be more active. There's more traveling. There's going to be new expenses they didn't have while they were working. So, we maybe have to model that they're going to spend more in the first 10, 15 years versus, and kind of fade down a little bit. But retirement, if you think about it, you retire at 60 and you live the average, if you live 80 to 90, that's, versus retiring at 65 and living 80 or 90, those are more years you have to cover more expenses.
And one analogy that resonated with me is retirement spending is oftentimes shaped like a smile. Yep. So earlier on, you're, like you said, you have your health, I want to travel, I have all this stuff that I need to do, go, see my family, you spend more money, you settle into more of a routine, for the majority of your retirement, and then towards the end, picks back up, obviously either healthcare costs, giving money away, things like that. So something that I've seen, through experience that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And one of the things too, if you do retire before Medicare age, that's one of the biggest expenses we see for clients is that healthcare cost, right? Yep. A lot of times, clients aren't aware of how expensive it could potentially be having to go out onto the market. All right. So we touched a little bit about health and life expectancy. This is a big one. Clients always say, I always run out to age 99. They're like, I'm not living that long.
Yeah.
I go, well, what if you do? Yeah. Or, you're in great health now, you're golfing 5 days a week, you might live longer than 82. So those are things we still have to plan for. I just had a client who passed away at 105. Wow. So those are the things you have to think about, because if you spend too much money in those early years and you do live 10 years longer than you anticipate, it really can make things challenging at the end.
And the next one is Social Security timing.
Yep.
This is something where there's a lot of, different pieces of content out there that say, hey, this is the right or the wrong way to go about it. We found through practice obviously isn't any right or wrong way, but this can really make a big difference on how long your money lasts.
Yeah, and this is the big one we're getting a lot lately. I just had this conversation last week where, hey, should I take Social Security at 62? And I said, well, you're still working, so no, because you can't. If you take it before age, your full retirement age, you lose, $1 for every $2 over a limit. But also, it's that 8% guarantee. You don't get an 8% guarantee anywhere else, right? You're not getting that guarantee from your returns and your investments and those types of things. So again, that timing really comes into the factor of helping your longevity of your assets.
Right. And the next one is, without, out of everybody's control, but it's a big factor because obviously it changes over time. That's inflation. We've seen, decades where we really haven't hit 2%, from 2010 through 2020. Pandemic comes around, all of a sudden, inflation's running up near 10%. So that's something where obviously out of your control, but you want to make sure that your investments align with inflation expectations and all of that stuff is baked into your planning. Yeah,
because if you get too conservative, then you might not be able to keep with that inflation, and that can really challenge your spending habits. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so let's get into a couple examples.
So the first one, just very simplistic. Hey, you have a $1 million client. They live in Oklahoma City, no mortgage.
Yep.
Very different set of circumstances than somebody that's living, obviously here locally.
Yeah. So, again, it comes back to what's it cost for your property tax, right? This is a big one. This is one we talk about all the time. If even if you lived in Florida, for example, there's no state tax, but the property tax is higher. And there's certain states that have that scenario. So you have to factor in what are going to be your fixed expenses? Is it just, your lights, your electricity, the main household food, those types of things. And then you have a travel budget. Very different than if you live in Northern Virginia, right? If you live in Northern Virginia, your property tax is likely higher. It costs more to go to Starbucks. All these things are going to add up where your life is going to have more expenses than you would in that smaller town in Oklahoma.
Sure. It's something where, hey, is my retirement going to be very simplistic? It comes back to knowing yourself, or am I going to be somebody that spends a lot of money, carries a mortgage, is, constantly traveling? It's obviously, hey, this is what I envision for myself. And, shifting gears to where a firm like ours fits in, obviously that's where you leverage the technology that we have, the planning, experience, context that we can add at different conversations to say, hey, this is things that I would think about if I were you, and things that you would definitely have on your radar as you move into retirement.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example. I just did modeling for a client last week who lives in Maryland, and the Maryland state tax is significantly higher than it is in Virginia. Mm-hmm. Their property tax is significantly higher. And literally for them to move to either Delaware or Virginia was going to save them $15,000 in taxes. That's over $1,000 a month. Yeah. Just literally moving 15 miles. So something that you have to consider. And that's not even downgrading the house, right?
Right.
So things like that. And we have a lot of clients who move to Florida, right? So their state income tax goes away. So if you do have these RMDs and higher, account amounts have to come out, they're going to be ordinary income tax. There are certain states where you don't have to pay those income tax. So it provides you, and then there's some states that don't tax on Social Security and pension. So all these factors come into play when you're thinking about what your number looks like, because it all starts with, what are your expenses? What's that, if you have a travel budget, what are those other pieces that make up your max expenses? And then we have to back into what are your resources.
Yep. And we did a full-fledged screen share example of this on our YouTube page where, hey, you have $1.5 million, and you're 60, can you retire? So we walk through a lot of the different parts of our Money Guide Pro software like you just laid out. So you can check that out in real time. We're going to link a description to this video and have that there for everybody. The last point here, we talked about a lot, but as time goes on, technology improves, longevity, it's a real thing. Just something that's so important to plan for and make sure that you're planning for 90 plus and have that ready to go if needed.
Yeah, and what also comes into that play is not only the money aspect, but we did a podcast and says, what are you going to retire to? What's going to keep you active? What's going to keep you engaged? Is that hobby going to be expensive? Is it not going to be expensive? And that also will lead to, what's your healthcare scenario going to look like later? Typically if you're more active, if you are healthier and you're staying fit and wellness, your expenses on the health side may not be as high also. So that's something always that we talk to clients. And, part of that is just, hey, what's the next step and next chapter look like? And it's not just about the finance part we talk a lot about, but that will impact your number. Right? It will impact your number if you are going to be active and traveling the world and hiking, and those things will come in. That number might be a little bit higher.
Yeah, for sure. And when it comes down to, the planning software and us doing these projections in a very simplistic form, it often comes down to your distribution rate versus the rate of return that you're actually earning on your investments. That's something that I think we should, spend a couple minutes talking about.
Yeah, and that's a key point to unpack, because your distribution rate in conjunction of your entire portfolio is really important. And what that looks like at the beginning, how that might change over time, and what your resources. Because you may start out, if you retire before, let's say you retire at 65, you start Medicare, but you decide to wait to take Social Security to 70. So the portfolio you might have to take more money out of your portfolio in the early years.
Yep.
And then when you hit 70, how does that adjust and change? And then when you hit requirement of distribution age. So really kind of unpacking what assets are going to make up those years. How's that going to affect the tax picture? And ultimately, the one tax no one really talks about is that additional Medicare premium if you get hit with IRMA. So those pieces really come into play when we're, looking looking at that longevity in those numbers.
Yeah, and I know, every time that we get together with a client, we'll say, hey, based on the last, 5 years, call it, for example, we've distributed roughly, 5% of the portfolio per year. Here's what we've earned. And we'll have those numbers there over the 3, 5, 10-year mark. And that, I think when clients see that, hey, I'm earning 7%, distributing 5%, that's when the light bulb goes off of like, hey, I feel comfortable. I can start spending this money. And what's important about the investment rate of return aspect is, if you look at the data, over 100 years worth of data for the general U.S. stock market, we've only finished in that quote unquote average band of an 8 to 12% rate of return 6 times. So we just consistently educate clients, hey, it's never going to be a straight line. We're going to have good years, bad years. That number, that average annualized number, that's the most important piece to this whole thing. Yeah,
that's a great point. And also, kind of backing into how you're going to structure thing to get through those negative years. When the market's up, nobody cares. Oh yeah, take the money from the stocks. They're great. I love that stock, whatever, that fund. But it's the planning for the down years, right? It's the where are we going to have the assets when we have, if we had a year like 2008, right? It took about 5 years for the S&P to recover. You certainly don't want to sell stocks when they're down. So having that plan and having that structure to say, here's where we go when we have those challenging years. These assets are going to hold the portfolio up. And then when things are great and chugging on all cylinders, this is where we're going to take out of the portfolio. So it's definitely having that thought process and understanding, because we get a lot of times, we'll talk to people, markets down, and they'll go, oh, you're getting lots of calls. We're like, we don't get lots of calls, because we walk through that strategy and help clients understand, look, here's your withdrawal rate. Here's what the average earnings are, but here's how we're going to get through those years where things are going to be tough. And we're going to have tough years. We're going to plan for that. I think that's a key piece when you're thinking about your number. It can't just all be, hey, I'm just going to own 100% in equity and everything's going to be great.
Right. And, you're thinking about the number and how long will that, your money last in retirement. And my pushback against, prospective clients when they say that is, if your retirement is depending on the overall market staying elevated or staying on the run that we've been on, you're asking, the wrong question. There's a lot of, planning to be done.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah. Well, we really ran through, the list there. Hopefully we added, good context through, our meetings to this topic. And as always, thank you to our listeners. We've continued to gain a lot of momentum here, well over 150,000 views across all of our different channels. And a lot of these topics, such as this one, comes from conversations that we've had during client meetings. And if you have anything that you'd like to talk to us about or have us to discuss, please feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you for joining.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Great Review. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Spotify and recommend our podcast to family and friends. To learn more about VLP Financial Advisors, please check out our website at vlpfa.com. Thanks again.
And now for our necessary disclosures. Securities and advisor services offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will be successful. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned. Due to the volatility with the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results.